Alrighty, today we're going to take on FairMormon's YouTube channel. They posted this video by a kid named Kwaku, an aspiring Mormon apologist, and this is about the seer stone. Now, I used to look at FairMormon when I was questioning the church, and it's really interesting to see kind of how low they've come. So let's just watch this and see what's happening here.
You know what I don't get? How people act like the seer stone part of the translation process is like the deal breaker, you know what I mean? It starts off with Moroni, an ancient Native American who dies and goes to heaven and comes back as a glowing angel. That's fine, right? Literally, an Indian flying through time and space to get to Palmyra, New York is okay, but once you put a rock in a hat, oh, that's where it just gets crazy.
So, that's their opening. I understand this is for comedic effect. This would work, at BYU, talking to BYU students. He makes a good point if your doubt is, a seer stone. This is impossible that he could, look into a seer stone and channel divine revelation. If that were your argument, I think this is a valid argument. It's not necessarily more ridiculous than the other Mormon claims. But that's not the argument that made me so appalled when I saw this seer stone in the ensign. I was actually Mormon at the time. This is one of the things that chipped away at my faith. What was concerning is that I'd served a 2-year mission telling people a story about these brass plates that he found, and showing them pictures of church art where we see Joseph Smith, with these plates in front of them, studying them, sometimes with these spectacles, this Urim and Thummim. We're showing this to investigators, and it makes a good story that, hey, there was this ancient record buried, and through the power of God, he translated it. It's understandable why they buried this other story about the seer stone.
Let's talk about rocks.
And just a comment, they call this is the show because it's an acronym for tits. So, as a Mormon, it just seems a little hypocritical. It's going against what I think the official church would want, is to have a show called Tits. But
CES letter quotes respected, active Latter-day Saint scholar Richard Bushman, who said, "What in the world are the plates for? Why do we need them on the table if they're just wrapped up into a cloth when he looks into a seer stone?"
As many know, Joseph Smith used the Urim and Thummim to translate the Book of Mormon. Since Joseph was the prophet of the Restoration, he would be spiritually numbered among ancient people like the priests of the Old Testament who used the Urim and Thummim, aka magic rocks, to perform the will of God, or even Aaron, who used a magic stick. Joseph used seer stones that would tell him what was written on the golden plates. And this is how the Book of Mormon was translated.
all right, so this is an error. Joseph Smith's treasure-seeking peepstone is not the Urim and Thummim. Now, it's interesting. We learned, and what we taught, is that when Joseph Smith found the golden plates that the angel, had placed, that it had this breastplate with this apparatus where it came with these 2 clear stones where he could see the Urim and Thummim. I'm not sure where the church actually stands on that, but that's actually a different thing than this rock. You'll notice through this whole thing, they never talk about the history of this rock. So the Urim and Thummim that we find in the Old Testament wasn't a translucent stone. They'd look for stuff. It was actually kind of a yes or no. You'd flip the rocks and it'd tell you yes or no. So this is not accurate.
Why did Richard Bushman act as if there was no need for the plates?
Well, he didn't. Jeremy Runnels and his subreddit Herd of Flying Monkeys are specifically not including a part of the interview where he talks about why the golden plates were necessary. They deliberately left this out to manipulate you.
Now, I find this comical, hypocritical that we've got Jeremy, and he's trying to find the truth. I don't care if he gets on Reddit, he's on the internet looking for things, and apparently that's, a sin, and they're accusing him of hiding things, hiding history, things that happened. It's just kind of funny in the context of Mormonism.
They deliberately left this out to manipulate you.
They deliberately left it out to manipulate you. Again, you're talking to somebody, me, who served a mission, graduated from seminary for 4 years, or I think 3 years in high school, went to the MTC for 3 months and rigorously studied Mormon history, not Mormon history, Mormon doctrine. They left the history part out. Every day, studied on the mission for 2 years, the church-approved sources, was a member for a good decade after that, going to church, and it wasn't even clear to me that Joseph Smith was a polygamist during my mission until years after. That was never a conversation we sat down to have. And showing people pictures of church art and reading stories that Joseph Smith wasn't using his treasure-seeking peepstone, but had found magical glasses and was actually looking at the Book of Mormon. This is where I don't like the word triggered, but it would be appropriate here.
Here's the quote. People say that the Book of Mormon certainly is an inspired and inspiring book, but the backstory of the plates and the translation is irrelevant to it. What would we gain and lose if we abandoned the plates? What we would lose would be a powerful form of the evidence that the Lord gave to Joseph Smith and to us of the actuality of these experiences, and therefore the actuality of the transcendent sphere. That would be gutting some of the most gritty and appealing parts of the Mormon story.
So, yes, the plates were one of the best marketing aspects as a missionary of the story. I agree. And that's why we used it. What you have to understand is the Book of Mormon that we know today, what's in there. There were no physical brass plates looked at to do this. And most of the time they weren't even actually there, like even covered on the table. They were supposedly hidden in a hill or something. We have a cloth on the table. And so it still leads, the prophets went through all this trouble to create this record, but Joseph Smith could have just looked in a peepstone and through his imagination revealed it. So, and what's also funny too is now they're throwing in this other, Bushman's trying to come up with some explanation for this that makes sense. And he's saying, well, look, it was an important test of Joseph Smith's faith. Let's just keep going.
Reynolds criticizes Joseph Smith for using a Ouija board to translate the Book of Mormon. The only problem is that the Ouija board wasn't created until 1894, and Joseph Smith translated the Book of Mormon in 1829.
Also,
now this is just an obvious lie. Go read the CES letter, and maybe I can put it up here. He's using it as a metaphor. He never says Joseph Smith used a Ouija board to translate the Book of Mormon. So they're either just blatantly lying, or they are not very good scholars. And I doubt they are scholars, but let's keep going.
Also, no, Joseph didn't use a Ouija board to translate the Book of Mormon. If you believe a bogus lie like that, you probably believe Jussie Smollett, or that you're gonna win a cruise on an Instagram giveaway. You're not.
Okay. Again, the hypocrisy here, what they said was just a bogus lie. There's no way to read what Jeremy said in the CES letter and say, oh, he's saying that Joseph Smith used a Ouija board. What bugs me is you're going to get some Mormon kids watching this and thinking they've actually debunked anything or they've heard a good argument. And it's just going to close that mind. Now, that question's answered. And that's what FairMormon's good for. It's like this kind of, somebody figured that out. I don't have to wrestle with it. It's been figured out. And they believe it, but it's not true.
He did use seer stones to translate. By the process of logic, it's bizarre that someone would use this as a weapon against the church. Joseph Smith's first divine claim was that God and Jesus appeared to him. If you don't believe in God or Jesus, then you don't believe Joseph's claim. The seer stone divinity is operating under the umbrella of God existing. The CES letter is atheistic, and examining the seer stone under an umbrella in which there isn't a God is meaningless.
If that were true, then the whole FairMormon endeavor would be meaningless and pointless. They're trying to engage this at a scholarly level, which requires evidence. You can't appeal to just divine claims. Now, I think it uncovers a truth of really what Mormonism is. There's this kind of facade of logic and reason and trying to do history and archaeology, but the problem is, even when all of that comes up bankrupt, the truth is they really just believe because they have a feeling it's true. And so it's fun, and I think there's value in engaging in these conversations. It helps develop our intellect. It helps people see that this is there's not real evidence behind this.
Believe in God and Jesus, then you've opened the door for angels, spirits, and all sorts of supernatural things. It's not as if this is technically weirder than those things. If you don't believe in anything supernatural or divine, then obviously you wouldn't believe that God could use objects for divine purposes. So essentially we're saying, who cares?
They're still arguing this straw man that's not the crux of most people's doubt. For me, it was like, holy cow, people have been excommunicated for talking about these things. You look at Grant Palmer, and you had these historians trying to bring to light these things in the 80s, and people are being excommunicated. It's not like the church didn't know about the seer stone. And so there's that aspect of, well, I've been deceived, and the people who are telling the truth are these anti-Mormons, who I was told that you shouldn't ever look at anything on the online anti-Mormon. As a missionary, it's forbidden to read anything other than the church-approved sources. So this is a big part of people's faith corroding in the Mormon church. It's like, holy cow, these men are supposed to be prophets, seers, and revelators. I'm looking to them for truth. They're supposed to be the most pure fountain of truth we have. And this slipped under the radar? This huge aspect of our narrative? Couldn't they have received a little bit of insight from God to fix this and tell the truth? And this goes into the other argument. There's absolutely no reason, no evidence to believe that the leaders of the church have any type of divine insight into life. And it's arguable that they've actually been dragging their feet on most moral progress. Gay rights, civil rights movement, things like that. That's another topic we can hit later.
The CES letter is making a claim that nobody knew about seer stones until recently, and that the church didn't talk about it. For one, that's nonsense, because whenever we teach about Joseph Smith, we discuss the Urim and Thummim. In fact, if you Google the words Urim and Thummim, the first thing you see are magic Jewish rocks from the Old Testament. It's also plainly spoken about in Doctrine and Covenants section 17 and 10.
It's been referenced throughout church history numerous times.
They're pretending like the church has been forthright because, hey, they talk about the Urim and Thummim. That's not the seer stone. They're two different things. The Urim and Thummim was supposedly buried with the Book of Mormon. And I can see why Joseph or whoever would have made that story up, because they didn't want people to know about this treasure-seeking history. Joseph was the talented treasure finder, and so he'd look in the stone and kind of think of a dowsing rod and be like, oh, it's over there. And then they dig, and then they wouldn't find the treasure, and he'd be looking in it. Oh, no, wait, the treasure's slipping. Oh, it looks like there was a spell cast on this. Okay, oh, wow, what happened is there was two Indians who buried this treasure, and one killed the other and threw him into the treasure, and he's defending the treasure, and he's making it slip. Like, this is what they would say. This is what Joseph was doing. Now, do you believe, even if you're a believing Mormon, that he was really seeing real treasure that was cursed and slipping into the earth? Do you believe that? Really? They never actually found buried treasures, and Joseph was taken to court for this, and what's interesting is because of that, we actually have some transcripts. We could get into that a little bit more. Maybe I'll dig some of that up. And so this is the same stone he'd use to later, which we now know it's not really translating the Book of Mormon. He'd look into it, and he'd put it in his hat, and he would channel the scriptures. We knew he was very gifted since the time he was a little boy. He'd come and tell these stories to his family. This is documented about the natives and their wars. So for a decade or so, he's been doing this, telling these stories. He's super into Bible studies. He was on the debate team. He had committed to memory large passages of the scriptures. He was a talented storyteller. And I also understand the need for somebody to be a scribe. Verbally telling a story is different than writing. I can spin bedtime stories for my kids. And so I understand this talent of Joseph, and it'd actually be a fun exercise. Maybe I'll do it sometime, is just, bury my head in in the dark and I'll spin some scripture for you. It'll be great.
Now, obviously, we don't spend Sunday school talking about the rocks of Joseph or the staff of Moses or the rod of Aaron. Jesus is more important.
Moses wasn't using his staff to swindle people out of money and then used it to part the Red Sea.
However, this lack of attention doesn't mean the church was maliciously withholding anything.
So again, the topic is seer stones, but what this whole topic brought up for a lot of members is this sense of deceit, of half-truths from the people who are claiming to be this fountain of truth, the gods, protectors of truth on earth, prophets, seers, revelators. They've got super connection to God and superpowers, and they're either blatantly deceiving us or not being forthcoming with the truth, or hiding things and telling us we're sinful if we look for things. So another example of this is in Elders Quorum. We would read the teachings of the prophets, and they had one of Brigham Young. Now, you can get through that whole thing, and it talks about his life and some of the history. The whole thing, and you'd never know that he was married to more than one woman at a time. Brigham Young. So you could say, well, that's not necessary, there's milk before the meat. Well, it's just deceit. It's like selling a car and saying, well, they don't need to know that this was in a previous accident, and we're just going to hide that Carfax, because if they knew, they wouldn't buy it, and it's really important that they buy it. And we've seen this insomuch as the truth has come out, that we have access to the history and the full narrative, church conversion and membership goes down. Now, clearly, the truth about the church is important to people and would change the decisions they'd make. It's kind of like, screw you. I have one life. I would have lived it very differently had you told me the truth. Conversion in Mormonism is basically zero in industrialized first world countries with access to the internet. The amount of education you have, unless you were already born Mormon, the less likely you are to convert to the church.
This begs the question, why did Joseph need the golden plates if the translation process was largely without plates at all?
Just to be clear, he's using begs the question wrong. We often misuse begs the question. That's not how. Begs the question doesn't mean it calls for the question. Beg the question is more about circular arguments. So like saying, well, the Book of Mormon is true because the Book of Mormon says it's true. That begs the question. That's a circular argument.
I think it's because the plates are a literal testimony of God. They contain the written testimonies of ancient prophets, and they themselves are a divine physical miracle.
Joseph had to guard them from robbers. Sometimes he even had to fight people. He had to keep the plates, a literal testimony, safe.
It's really funny on a lot of these stories because when you actually think about it, you've got Joseph with these plates, heavy. He's running from the bad guys, fighting people in the forest. Papa, look, I hurt my thumb. It was fighting people. Now, for all we know, a lot of people think he probably had some type of tin plates. There was a lot of sheets of metal you could get back then, and you could bend them around. And, he may have just hurt his thumb doing that, but, comes back and tells us where the bad people came out of nowhere inspired by Satan. And I gave him a licking, carrying 100-pound plates, running through the forest. It's really funny.
You know what's funny? People who are like, oh, use seer stones to translate. Half the country believes that Jesus walked on water and that a virgin gave birth. You believe that. You do. But Joseph can't use seer stones, all right? My gosh, half of you guys watched WWE and you believed it. Oh, yeah, but seer stones, that's where you draw the line.
Anyway, the same straw man argument. It's not about that. Maybe just for some people. I haven't run into a lot of people who are like, oh, I just can't believe the seer stone. It's, the anti-Mormons, the ex-Mormons, they were right all along.